Hi, everyone. How are we? It's nice to see you. Welcome back to Normal Island Live. I am Sneakcret, and I'm going to be hosting you for tonight's show. Now, tonight we are going to be covering the latest updates on Grenfell. We're going to be covering the responses to the government suspension earlier this week of the 30 out of 350 arms licenses to Israel as we await the ICC decision on arrest warrants. We're going to be looking at accountability for water bosses, accountability for everybody else, and we're going to be looking at some of Labour's more questionable patrons as Keir Starmer's approval ratings have hit a new low since the election. As always, we want to hear your thoughts on the issues that matter to you, so do drop them in the chat. And if we miss anything, just let us know what you'd like to see covered by us in the Sunday debrief on Turn Left. You can message us on Turn Left Media on TikTok, on Twitter, or Instagram as well. Before we do jump in, we are joined tonight by the wonderful Daviemoo, who will be talking through some of the major stories this week with me. Davie, on a scale of 1 to 10, how pleased are you that the grown-ups are in charge?
Oh, to borrow a line from Rachel from X Factor, it's got to be a solid 10. Who wouldn't be excited to finally be rid of a neoliberal government who's been accused of cronyism and who's been paying out big money to big bosses and immiserating the poor? What a marked change.
It's been a great week for both of us. And everyone give a warm welcome to Davie as well. Okay, right. We're going to jump into the headlines. Everybody take a deep breath. This is what's on the cards for tonight. So we have got a few stories that we're going to be running through. We'll be covering the latest from Gaza. As Israel has withdrawn from Jenin, there's been criticism on the rise over the UK's limited suspension of arms sales to Israel, specifically covering the F-35s that have now been confirmed by Danish outlet Information as being used in attacks on a designated safe zone in July. We'll be talking about prisons and policing in particular. The prison population in England and Wales has apparently reached a new high as ministers suggest sending prisoners to Estonia to ease the overcrowding. Alongside this, we've got warnings that water companies could face jail time over pollution offences. So we'll be checking in to see if there is anything else that Starmer would like to arrest. We'll have a look at the responses to the Grenfell inquiry. We've had 19 companies and 58 individuals named in the report, but we'll be going into some of the more systemic issues at its heart over the next hour. We then have Labour's patrons and dark money. As the left of the party have told us that they'll be less than present at the upcoming conference, Navarro Media have revealed that Israeli arms suppliers Northrop Grumman will be sponsoring a talk at the event. Alongside this, Open Democracy have just released a new installment of Dark Money, showing that key members of the Labour cabinet have received more than 170k worth of gifts and donations since the start of 2023. I'll give you a guess as to who's the top of the list there. Finally, we will get on to what YouGov are calling the end of the honeymoon period for Starmer. His approval ratings have fallen to the lowest since February of this year. But is this the beginning of the end, or is it just the usual trends? We're going to be covering all of these and more. So before we get into the main stories today, I just really want to thank everyone for joining us today. I want to thank everyone for subscribing. We actually hit 14,000 subscribers this morning, which is incredible to see because I think we were celebrating hitting 13,000 about 2 weeks ago. Everything that we're doing here with the team, with our production, with ourselves hosting, is being done on a voluntary basis. So every time someone subscribes, sharing the content, liking, engaging, anything that helps build up our voice here, we're really, really grateful for that. We are only covering a few stories in each live at the moment, but they often include the stories that aren't being given the platform they deserve in the mainstream media. Our goal at Turn Left is to give a space for more progressive socialist discussions from this side that doesn't involve like the basic debating of people's human rights. If you want to be part of the journey, you can support us on Patreon for either £3 or £5 a month, or you can make a one-off donation over at patreon.com/turnleftmedia. Okay, let's get into the news. So the latest from Gaza, Israel have withdrawn from Jenin after a 10-day raid, which has left Palestinians picking up the pieces in the aftermath of more destruction. But just tonight, we've had reports from Wafa news agency that Israeli forces have shot dead a 26-year-old American-Turkish activist in the Palestinian town of Beita in the West Bank. in the usual Western fashion, the White House have said that they are deeply disturbed by what they've heard, but they also need to investigate it properly to see what's actually happened. Palestinian medics, for their part, have said that the activist, who was of Turkish origin, was shot in the head and died at hospital. It is always interesting how deeply disturbed our politicians continue to be when the things that have been happening for months now continue to happen. David Lammy, for example, will be deeply disturbed to know that the F-35 fighter jets, exempted from his limited suspension of arms licenses earlier this week, advertised as the most lethal fighter jet in the world, have in fact been used to conduct a lethal attack on the people of Gaza. Almost concurrently with his reluctant announcement of the suspension of just 30 out of 350 arms licenses the UK are currently supplying, the Danish outlet Information definitively confirmed the use of the F-35 in the Israeli attack that killed 90 people in a designated safe zone earlier in July. Now, media publications like The Telegraph are very angry at Lammy for his new anti-Israel stance. But for other groups, this limited suspension is nothing more than an admission of guilt. We have a contribution from Sam Perlow Freeman at the Campaign Against Arms Trade this week that said exempting parts for Israel's F-35 is utterly outrageous and unjustifiable. These are by far the UK's most significant arms supplies to the Israeli military. And just today, we've had confirmation that they've been used in one of the most egregious attacks in recent months. The government have admitted that there is a clear risk that Israel is using fighter aircraft amongst other weapons to violate international humanitarian law. So how does this clear risk not apply to the F-35s? The Campaign Against Arms Trade aren't the only ones that are angry here. We've also heard from Amnesty International, who've criticised the move. Now, they have said the government is nevertheless continuing to risk complicity in war crimes and apartheid and possibly genocide by Israeli forces in Gaza. It's a tricky spot to be in for David Lammy. He's trying to walk the party line. He's trying to not risk being held individually responsible as a state politician for allowing UK arms to be engaged in acts of genocide. There's a lot that he has to weigh up, right? Davey, we've had a little bit of time this week to watch responses to the announcement. What are you feeling?
I feel absolutely no sympathy with David Lammy whatsoever, because ultimately one of the first things that he did when he was announcing the suspension was to say it was unfortunate, confirming that he's doing this against his will, despite the fact that there's clear evidence that these arms are being used in literal war crimes. Additionally, something that is still hotly debated was the fact that he also stood at the dispatch box and confirmed that he's a Zionist, which I think, you might as well stand there and say, I'm prejudiced. Yeah, like I'm proudly standing for the country that's committing these war crimes. And the question that we have to ask ourselves is, why is international law so important unless it's our allies that are violating it? It's absolutely insane. And the big thing that we really need to think about here is Lammy believes that Israel is in existential danger. And so it's vital that we send these contributions to him. And yet we also get told repeatedly by Labour that we aren't important enough to call for an arms embargo, that we need to carry on supplying these things and we need to carry on supporting Israel because it's going to collapse. But they also need our arms. Like, do you rely on us for these things or do you not? It's got to be one or the other.
I think, was it in the statement where he's saying we can't suspend the licenses for the parts that go into the F-35 program? He didn't refer to them as fighter jets in the speech because it would have sounded worse, a bit fighty. But he did say that's a key part of global security. It's absolutely crucial. However, when they have been questioned about it, they've also said, we're not really the ones giving that many of the arms to them. Like, it's not that big. We're just little guys. We're not playing that big a role. It does feel like there's this consistent paradox between them. The backlash from the right of the Labour Party has been relatively concerning. It feels like what he's done in this statement is make it very clear that he's going to do everything he can to not put any kind of sanction or embargo on Israel, but also still do it anyway. I feel like he's put himself in the worst possible position.
I think that kind of typifies David Lammy, is that he's taking both, like, he's like, what's the phrase, is the cat alive or dead? He's that kind of politician where he's playing both sides. I'm glad to see you're struggling with it too. I was like,
it's not Chekhov's cats.
I think The big thing that really gets to me here is, like, if you actually read the law, like the provisions under what we're talking about here, it's so explicitly clear. It's not you have to have undeniable proof. Thank you, Cog. It is Schrodinger's
Yeah,
cat, our excellent
Schrodinger's
moderator
arms
has told
deal.
us it's Schrodinger's cat. But when it comes to this, the law doesn't say you have to have definitive proof. It says suspicion. You have to suspend arms licenses if there is suspicion. We've been watching a live stream of the horrible things that are happening in Gaza and even in the West Bank for months now. How much proof do you freaking need, guys? Like at some point, when are you going to turn around and be like, actually, because this has been being pointed out to you for nigh on a year now.
Yeah, I think the fact that any of these weapons have been considered, any of these arms exports have been considered something that is potentially being put at risk of aiding and abetting a genocide, it does call into question, maybe just to be safe, you wouldn't want to give any more of those arms licenses away, just to be safe, because you're essentially saying that you believe that country is plausibly committing a genocide at this point, crimes against humanity. It is going to be interesting to see how that kind of plays out over the next month or so. I think the fact that on the day that was announced, the confirmation of the F-35s being used in that attack that killed 90 people in Gaza was absolutely insane. But it feels like they're now, especially with this assassination earlier today of this American Turkish activist, we're getting the same rhetoric from the US, from the White House of, we're very disturbed, we're very concerned, we're going to have to see what happened. We need to figure out, won't someone tell us what's going on? And we had a lot of that in Lemmy's statement as well. We can't be sure of the circumstances surrounding any of these crimes against humanity. I just don't know where we get a way out of this.
I think the big problem that we're looking at is the long-termism of it all. Like one of the things that I think we talk about, a lot together is the short-termism of British politics. And the concern is, like one of the refrains of people that we constantly speak to about this is, this isn't a genocide. No one said it's a genocide. It took 14 years, was it, for them to rule that the Bosnian genocide was in fact a genocide? We're less than a year into this. We're not going to be able to officially declare it a genocide for more than a decade, but we have our eyes and we can see where this is going. And ultimately, I don't want it to be a genocide. So the point is, if that's where it looks like it's going, perhaps now's the time to be like, may I interject?
You know what, though, to be fair, when we do look at the policing conversation in a second, we do seem to often just want to wait and see until it's really bad before taking any kind of action. But we do only do that when we're talking about minorities. So we'll have to see how we get on. Thank you very much, Davey. We are going to jump into the next story. So prisons are overcrowded. This came out today. Unsure if we've tried telling the prisons that it's illegal for them to be overcrowded. The prison population in England and Wales has reached a new high, which isn't ideal for the Labour government, who, as we know in recent weeks, have been talking a lot about increasing police powers, bringing in the full force of the law. We had the 6,000 police officers acting as a standing army during the riots. It's pretty much anything and anyone they can when it comes to bringing down the full brunt of justice. Record numbers of incarcerated people are in English and Welsh prisons at the moment. They are doubling down on this rhetoric of the authority and rule of law, but with no prison spaces left, ministers are now seemingly refusing to rule out the possibility of literally sending the incarcerated to Estonia in order to ease overcrowding. To be fair to the government, they have introduced the threat of jail to water company bosses as new laws have been proposed this week, although it might also just mean they're banned from receiving bonuses. We're not sure yet. It's a little bit of a grey area. What hasn't been explicitly said on the front pages this week, we have been talking about prisons being overcrowded and the need for a solution. Whilst the Labour Party solution is seemingly we just need to get more prison spaces wherever they are, there are other reasons behind this in terms of why we're facing overcrowding in the UK. So the head of the Prison Governors Union, Tom Wheatley, said this week that what he recommends is not actually sending the incarcerated to Estonia, but a wider review of sentencing policy to address what he refers to as the sentence inflation of the last 35 years. What the PGA wants to see is a prison service that is properly resourced to manage the number of people being imprisoned safely, securely, and decently. not in overcrowded, squalid, or dangerous conditions. But a lot of people get quite nervous when we talk about prison places and having to release prisoners. Having softer sentences, reducing sentences, it all sounds very woke, very concerning. We do actually have some stats from a 2023 report from the Prison Reform Trust that I think gives an important bit of context to this topic overall. So, just looking through this, more than 40,000 people were handed jail sentences in 2022, but only 61% of those were non-violent. Not only 61%, I don't want more of them. That means over half of our prisoners are serving time for non-violent offences. However, we also know that prison sentencing is considered to be one of the worst ways to tackle the issue of reoffending. Out of 42% out of the people who've been released from a jail sentence in 2023, 42% of those are rearrested within the year. So we know that prison time is more likely to lead to reoffending. We know that there's a huge amount of people in prisons in England and Wales that are serving jail time not for violent crimes. Davey, do you think maybe we could just threaten to bring down the full force of the law? What do you think is the best next step?
Obviously, that's what we have to do. There's no point in changing things. We just have to keep threatening harder, and eventually that will happen. I think when we're talking about this, the big problem is this has been a known problem for a long time. The first time that something like this was brought up was there was a report released in 1991 called the Wolf Report, which is a response to the Strangeways riot. And that itself covered quite a lot of information about the fact that there needed to be a stricter look at how we were sentencing people. And one of the big things it talked about was dealing with the conditions that people were living in prisons. There was an article this week about someone who's been arrested abroad for something and been sent to a Thai prison. And all the comments were saying that he's never going to see the light of day again, or things like that. It's all well and good. There's this like justice boner that people have in the UK for like seeing people suffer when they get sent to prison, and it doesn't work. One of the main issues is that since then, two more reports have come out that have warned about this kind of thing, and ultimately, there's no focus on de-radicalization, there's no focus on reintegration, and certainly there's no focus on recidivism. It's all about punish, punish, punish. But like when you look at the kind of disparate sentencing between blue collar and white collar crime, even in the UK, it's bigger in the US. It's very clearly a massive problem.
Yeah, I mean, that was the thing we were just saying earlier, the fact that there was the headline about water company bosses could face jail time at the same time. It's like, oh, wow, at least I guess it's not unfair. They're trying to arrest just absolutely everybody. When you actually read through, the other option is that it might just be their bonuses get taken away. Meanwhile, we have a government that's celebrating the fact that we could get people sentenced within the day. Like, we're going to have a real quick turnaround trial for people. It feels as though people are just glad to see baddies get locked up or something, but we're now dealing with the prisons that there's no space left. How many people are we planning on arresting at this stage? It seems to be kind of counterintuitive, but the Labour Party did also say the reasoning that prisons are in such a state is because of the Tory government. They said it was Tory mismanagement. They were very surprised by the Tory mismanagement. I feel like they knew about the Tory mismanagement, but we keep being baffled by it.
It's weird, isn't it? It's like I feel like they weren't reading the same newspapers we were for 14 years that were pointing out in excruciating detail how bad the Tories were, and suddenly they're surprised with what they've been handed.
What's really strange with it as well is that the whole idea of sending prisoners to Estonia, they said that the Tories suggesting that was a ridiculously bad idea when the Tories were suggesting it. But it now seems to be the case that we are not ruling it out as an option.
So, is anyone else picking up on a thread that's really strange, that when the Tories offer policy, it's bad and horrible and really nasty, and the red guys are evil, and then the blue guys, and then when the red guys do it, it's a really great policy and it's a fix to the problem? I feel like I'm just getting a sense of that,
It's Schrodinger's Chekhov or something similar.
There you go.
It's Chekhov's Tory. There you go.
I think one of the weirdest things we've got, like we've just seen these race riots, and there's people being put in prison for less time than eco activists who are warning us that the world is smoldering at the edges. And we've got, like there's this whole like fake news, if you want to put it that way, about like rapists' lives being ruined, and like you can't even get them in prison, and even if not only are they not going to prison, we've just seen one compete happily in the Olympics, and there's one running for the president of the bloody United States, convicted in a civil court. So I'm thinking maybe we need to holistically look at who's being sentenced for what and actually dole out proper punishments, and also put people in prison when they commit crimes. Just this weird idea I've got.
I think it's better to stretch yourself thin, as try and arrest as many people as possible at the same time, but don't really focus on arresting anyone. And then put everybody in Estonia. It's really frustrating because the reason that Estonia is even an option is because they have so many prison spaces, because they have such low rates of incarceration. I think it ties into what we were talking about a couple of weeks ago with the whole extremism and misogyny. Misogyny is going to be treated as extremism. Everything, like, we're going to treat everything as extreme or not a problem. We're not going to have a middle ground where we look at systemic issues.
I think that's the irony, though, because we say we're going to treat it as, but the treat is what we need to do. We have to start de-radicalizing. And ironically, the program Prevent, that's supposed to de-radicalize people, is just a program for being like, he's brown and sad, lock him up. It's just insane. There is no plan to actually deal with the root of why people are incarcerated in the first place, whether it's poverty conditions that necessitate stealing to be able to feed your family, whether it's like you failed to get an education, you've got long-term health issues. All of this stuff feeds on itself, and everyone's like, arrest the baddies, instead of thinking, why are the baddies bad in the first place?
It's bizarre. I think it's very strange to me that we are in a place where having high conviction rates is very, very good. But also we are also getting higher and higher incarceration rates. There's a couple of messages in the chat that I think are really interesting, talking about the sort of systemic issues that are causing arrests, particularly when it comes to issues like addiction or childhood abuse. I think there was somebody in the chat who had said, Double D actually said, approximately 80% of prisoners are victims of childhood abuse. I'm in the business. I'm assuming that means the prison business. However, it's exactly that kind of point. It's the fact that we've had a society that's been crumbling over the last however many years. Do you remember the headline that was talking about shoplifting being on the rise?
Yeah.
It was shoplifting's at an all-time high. Why is this happening?
Mystery. We've been through a 3-year-long cost of living crisis, and suddenly, just out of nowhere, shoplifting's gone up. It's an absolute mystery. People just don't want to work anymore. That must be what it is.
I think they're not trying hard enough.
Or they're not getting arrested. They're not seeing enough.
Yeah, they're not being arrested. They're not seeing enough arrests for it to properly be a deterrent. So we'll have to arrest more people.
Arrest them louder and harder.
We've got it. Okay, so that's sorted. I think this ties in quite well into the conversation about Grenfell. We have a lot more prison spaces available for some people. We're willing to send people to Estonia, but we are not willing to punish others. With the government so heavily set on fixing our society by arresting the problem, it feels as though politicians and the public alike have been highlighting and shouting for years now that not one person has served time for what's being called the social murder of the residents of Grenfell. So there were 19 companies, 50 individuals named in the 1,700-page report earlier this week. And the chair, Martin Moore-Bick, said that all of the deaths in Grenfell were avoidable. I know Lewis talked about the release of the report earlier this week on Wednesday, and you can watch that live back for more detail on the findings itself. I think one of the clips that I remember from the time, but did really shape me to see again, was this footage of Eric Pickles during the inquiry, which we will pull through for you now.
Together, but by all means, sir, feel free to ask me as many questions as you like. But could I respectfully remind you that you did promise that we will be away this morning, and I have changed my schedules to fit this in. I do have an extremely busy day meeting people, but this is more important than anything. But I would urge you to use your time wisely. Sir, could I'd like...
time wisely from Eric Pickles, which is, I think probably one of the most indicative signs of just how disillusioned we feel with politicians at the moment. That said, now the findings have been released and now the report is underway. There's a lot of remorse and apology being shared. Keir Starmer made an apology in the Commons when he talked about the report, despite the fact that a lot of MPs literally left the Commons immediately beforehand. But there's actually a lot of businesses that are still refusing to take any part of the blame. There are a couple of examples here that were compiled by The Guardian. This is the findings from the report itself, and then we're going to have a look at the responses from them. So this is regarding the company Arconic. They were accused of deliberately and dishonestly concealing from the market the true position in relation to the product that was sold for use on Grenfell in cassette form. The report also recommended that Arconic itself must take responsibility for the use of this on Grenfell Tower because it knew that the sale of the product had been attained on the basis of the British Board of Agreement certificate. Agreement, my bad, which it was well aware gave a misleading impression of the way in which the product in cassette form reacted to fire. This was the response from Arconic. They said they didn't do any of that. And actually, it was fine. The reports were all publicly available. They made them available for their customers. They did not conceal information or mislead any certification body, customer, or the public. We have one more that I'd really like to put a spotlight on here, which is the company Celotex. Celotex embarked on a dishonest scheme to mislead its customers in the wider market, and the dishonest and cynical way in which RS5000, the insulation, was tested and marketed reflected a culture within Celotex stretching back to at least 2009. Celotex's response was that they conducted their own review to interrogate the circumstances in which the product had been tested, launched, and marketed. They found that the review demonstrated the cladding system described met the relevant safety criteria. That system was substantially different to the one used at Grenfell Tower. And then decisions about design, construction, and the selection of materials for the tower were made by construction industry professionals. So these companies are still refusing to take the blame. There was another report earlier today, I think, of a contractor who was saying that it wasn't his fault, it was the company's fault. The companies are blaming contractors and the government. The government are seemingly very upset at the actions of these companies as well. Davey, are we going to get any kind of accountability taken seriously from any of these parties?
I don't think so. I think that it fits into the kind of, the wider climate that we've been living in, where it's, personal responsibilities everywhere, and yet it's everybody else's fault. I think one of the weirdest things for me, in terms of what I've seen this week, Emily Maitlis talked on her podcast about, like, she was going to sleep and apparently there was a lot of noise, and she turned to her husband and her husband was like, "Oh, there's a fire," and she was like, "Oh, thank goodness, I thought it was something bad," because she was so accustomed to the idea that a fire was nothing. We're really safe here and compliant, and that's that was fine. And I think it fits into this very long-standing set of issues we've got. Like, there were warnings back as early as 1999 when a report came out that said currently the majority of cladding being used is safe, but we need to keep an eye on it. And they said in this report in 1999, it should not take a fire just like Grenfell for people to start paying attention. Egregious as that is, the irony is we've had a fire like Grenfell. It's nearly a decade later, and there's people still going, "It wasn't me." Absolutely insane.
I think it's just gross. Like, I don't know. I'm listening to the findings from the report earlier today, and also thinking back to, do you remember just after Grenfell when I think Jeremy Corbyn wore the green tie? And that was immediately like a source of mockery in Parliament. I think there's a lot of words about how things need to be better, how things need to be resolved. I think Angela Rayner said that fire hazards need to be addressed more quickly. Yes. I feel like that should be an obvious one at this stage. But then seeing that clip as well earlier today of them emptying the house just before the findings were shared, it just feels like this brazen disregard for anyone who's considered like a normal person.
It's what's so frightening about it is at every single step there were failures. I'm not ashamed to admit that I cried my eyes out twice while I was reading through the phase two stuff today, because it was like you said, the companies were dishonest. They didn't test their products properly. If you read, like they tested one thing, and because there were similar sounding components, they thought that they could extend the zero, what's group zero accreditation of non-flammability to this other product, but the inside wasn't treated. So when it was broken into the cassette style that was put onto Grenfell, that exposed it and made it a source of flame. And so that happened. And then the contracting happened where, people were more interested in lobbying money than they were about looking at the actual safety of it. And like all the way through that, then the actual fire happens and you get the kind of go back to your flats and do what you're told. Then those people die. Jacob Rees-Mogg stands in Parliament and goes, well, if you were smart, you wouldn't do that. The level of disrespect. And it's just gone on and on. It's just gone on and on. From top to bottom, everybody involved has screwed over these people. And then on a personal level as well, I went to Byline Fest a couple of years ago. I can't remember exactly when it was. And there was a survivor of Grenfell there, traumatized to high hell, speaking about their experience, not of what happened on the night, but the way that they've been treated since by government ministers, by MPs, by safety regulators, the threats, the intimidation, the completely ignoring and dismissal, trying to make her sound crazy. It was it was heart-wrenching to listen to her speak about the way that she's been treated. It's absolutely appalling, and it hasn't stopped.
No, I mean I can't quite get my head around it at the moment. In the same as I was saying earlier with an American Turkish guy has been shot in the head by Israel, by the IDF, and the response from the White House is, well, we're very disturbed. There's nothing behind those words. And I know a lot of the commentary around the Grenfell report has been that if this was private housing, if this was expensive private housing, none of this would have been an issue. It's insane to see, like you said, the amount of essentially just overlook these problems so that we can get a little bit more cash out the back of it. Just individual salespeople at different stages. The fact that I completely forgot about the Jacob Rees-Mogg thing. Where he said, it was like, yeah, if you were smart, you wouldn't have listened to the instructions to stay in your flat.
It's appalling.
I guess it's still relatively fresh news this week. I'm hoping that it leads to some sort of actual action being pulled in, but I think looking at some of the lobbying groups that are on the side of Labour at the moment, we've got a lot of private housing developments. We've got a lot of these businesses kind of coming back into the fray. There's time for them to take action about it. It feels like from what we've seen so far, a lot of it is kind of like slowly nodding your head and expressing your sympathies and then sort of fucking off in your nice car.
There's two things that we need to be really deeply concerned about, which is who's lobbying Labour, which absolutely are these large manufacturers. They're the party of big business, after all. Let's not forget, they're very proud to wear that moniker, so let's remember what it means. But additionally, one of the things that's really, really deeply concerned me for a while is one of Rachel Reeves' magic salves, neoliberal fix for the economy is deregulation. And one of the things she's talked about is the deregulation of the building sector. And we're days out from phase 2 of a report that's highlighted in excruciating detail that there are incredibly obvious oversights and weaknesses within our regulation framework for this sector. And it's absolutely terrifying to hear our government talking about the idea of further deregulation to get building faster. And I pointed this out earlier. My concern is, we'll do the building. What happens in 15 years when we've deregulated away from more safety concerns and we have another Grenfell? Whose fault will that be?
It just feels like a vicious cycle. I think it makes sense now if we go through the sort of next story, looking around the Labour dark money, because I think you made a really good link there as well, in terms of the corruption that we're seeing. And then I think what we'll do after that, we'll have a quick jump to the chat and see what people have to say, share what your thoughts are. So there have been a couple of reports this week that have been pretty concerning when it comes to the Labour Party, their funding, and their patrons. There was a piece published in the Guardian earlier today that said that the left of the Labour Party have warned that their presence is going to be pretty diminished at the next Labour conference. There is typically a fringe festival that happens alongside the conference that is normally where, I think in 2016 it was where people were celebrating Corbyn. That is not going to be going ahead this year. But on the other side of that, Novara Media have revealed that Israeli arms suppliers Northrop Grumman are actually going to be sponsoring a talk at the Labour Party conference this year. The session is called A New Era of Defence. How can Labour address current and future challenges? It's going to be hosted in partnership with the New Statesman magazine. But the Northrop Grumman are one of the organisations that is partly responsible for the development of F-35s, which we were talking about earlier. It's not a great look for the Labour Party, but alongside this, the writers over at Open Democracy have also shared this week that key members of the Labour cabinet have received more than £170,000 worth of gifts and donations since the start of 2023, with Starmer actually being at the top of the gift list, having taken gifts like concerts, football tickets. I think the Eras tour was one of them, all amounting to more than £50,000 in that period. So we knew that Labour had a lot of commercial support, a lot of commercial funders. As Davey was saying earlier, they have been the party of business for the last couple of years. I think it'd be good for us to jump in a little bit more into the types of organisations that have been funding Labour through these gifts over the course of the last year or so. Firstly, Davey, I want to get your thoughts on these two stories running concurrently. Are you surprised? Are you baffled?
No, one of the reasons that I left Labour was because they just kept, everyone keeps talking about how the left doesn't compromise, but I was pushed to breaking long before, the atrocities in Palestine started. For me, it was the neoliberal stance on the economy, and then it was how hateful they were towards trans people, and that's all only gotten worse. So it's not a surprise. If you don't mind me saying, what the problem is for me isn't that this shocking things happened. It's been obvious for a while. The problem for me is the head in the sand approach from a bunch of people that will sit on online tests and test out that they're left wing, but then when it comes out to actually defending those policies and practically trying to chase them, they'll compromise and think that that's the best thing to do, because government's not good unless it hurts the working class. And it's those people that have contributed to Labour shifting this way with absolutely no hook to hang from.
Yeah, it feels as though, I can't remember what we were listening to the other day, but the idea that we were treating ahead of time, it was like, but Labour's going to come out and actually be really socialist. Like, he's going to take his little hat off and he's actually going to be a socialist. And we're all going to be fooled. And then we're all going to clap and have a socialist utopia. We don't really have the right to do that because they're doing what they said they were going to do. I think one of the examples of the events that was being hosted that Open Democracy covered in their Dark Money piece was a summer reception from the Fabian Society that was sponsored by FTI Consulting, Keep Moat Homes, property developers, life cycle real estate companies, asset managers, capital groups. I don't get the impression that those events are run by secret socialists.
No, they're not. And I think another streamer who's awesome is No Justice, and she covered something really important the other day when it came to Labour's watering down on the 28 billion pledge. What people need to get is Labour are not saying we're not going to invest any money in green. What happened was Rachel Reeves went to the World Economic Forum, and there she was lobbied by the do-bidders of billionaires who said, well, don't take public money for this. Why would you take public money? Here's these billionaires that want to give you all this money to invest in green. And to some people that sounds sensible, but you have to understand that that's like It's like walking up to someone that's got a giant lighter underneath the world and saying, "Excuse me, can I borrow that bottle of water that you've got so I can pour it on the world that you're setting on fire?" These are the people that are contributing to climate breakdown. And Rachel Reeves is like, let's also give them money to fix the problem they're causing. Just,
Mhm.
and this is the problem with this kind of type of politics that Labour have slid into, that it's this short-termist, look directly ahead but not at the uncomfortable things at the sides kind of dint that's going to mean that we're not actually fixing any of the problems at the root. It's just surface level spackle that's just going to collapse in on us.
I hate being spackled by the Labour Party.
Who
If,
doesn't,
there, if,
honestly.
if there's one thing I can't stand, it does. Yeah, I mean, we all kind of had the impression they were positioning themselves as people of business. We know that a lot of Tory donors have moved over to the Labour Party as well. I do think it's pretty insane that they've taken on a sponsor like Northrop Grumman, especially for a session about defence. Additional context, by the way, I forgot to say this, but for anyone who's not as familiar with them. So Northrop Grumman they do a lot of arms manufacturing, and in October, after October 7th, their share prices jumped up by 11.5%. So they're one of these companies that benefits massively whenever there's some kind of war taking place. I can't. They're just building themselves into this hole of like, I don't understand. Like, you're having David Lammy saying, yeah, we think that Israel might be doing war crimes, but we're not going to stop selling them most of the arms licenses. And then you've got these guys going, well, we're trying to keep neutral, follow international law, but we are going to have our event sponsored by a arms manufacturer. I'm nervous that the veil is slipping so much at this point that there's going to be some kind of like, there's not like as much of a lull for people anymore. People aren't buying into it in the same way as they used to. It's becoming more and more obvious and more barefaced, which I guess kind of, actually, I've thought about it too much in a circle. I guess that kind of leads into why they want to arrest everyone instead, right? The soft power is going out the window.
It was always going to happen because ultimately, I think what confuses me is there were so many people who were watching them build this big, really obvious neolib platform that was about exactly what you said. It was, Tory in nature. Let's ignore the problems of the EU. Let's take from poor so we can get back building. Let's deregulate instead of actually trying to tax rich people, and on and on and on. All of these things that are incredibly important. And all the while, people have been saying, oh, just wait. They have to do this because of the right-wing press. And then they got into power after building a very solid platform that was very clearly kind of like 2010 David Cameronian, you guys are going to have to pull your belts in and we'll all have to suffer together. And then everyone's like, hold on, they're doing what they said they were doing. Why is this happening? And you
But
kind
this
of
is
sit on the
bad.
internet and go, yeah, like, did you guys think I was doing this for fun? Like I literally turned against the Labour Party because I was like, if this is the platform you're building, I will not associate with it. Like, it's too late now.
But then when there was the child benefit cap, then when they voted against the child benefit cap, they had to have the whip withdrawn because they went against the manifesto.
But
The
that's
good
just
bits of the
it.
manifesto were promises.
The irony of that was they just took an accelerated position that Labour's claimed themselves. They said that they've set up this child welfare forum where they're going to sit down and discuss all the problems. Exactly what the bloody hell do you think that forum's going to say about the two-child benefit cap? It's good. Like they can do that, but ultimately what the problem that we're seeing is they've set themselves this like thing up to remove the two-child cap down the line. That's not going to lift children out of poverty now. That's where
Yeah.
the issue is. It's you. And what's the phrase? A stitch in time saves nine. You lift people out of poverty now, or you pay for their long-term health problems and prison recidivism down the freaking line.
And then you have to send them to Estonia.
Exactly. Like, can't think of anything worse or better. Although, what's the weather like there? Because I might commit a crime.
It does,
Like
yeah.
standing in the street and say, "Don't burn the world."
I'm going to report that. I can't
There you
believe
go.
that
That's it.
we've got him. Just
Imprison me.
It's I'm actually thinking about it now. The fact that they've got such low prison sentences, but yeah, it feels like we're getting into a very vicious cycle with this now. It is frustrating. I know we've talked about it before. The feeling of being able to say "I told you so" is just not. It's just not that sweet.
No, there's no joy in being. Like, there's no joy in like turning around to someone and being like, "I'm going to suffer immeasurably." Like, you don't really get to gloat when that's happening, do you?
well, I hope you're happy with all this as the world falls apart. I think you described it as like, look at all this shit, but you're in the shit. You're standing next to them in the shit going, well, I hope you're happy with yourselves. It's
look
horrible.
at all this, you losers. Yeah, look at this. You don't like this, do you?
It's all in my trousers. It's awful. It's
good times.
Good times. We laugh. We love to laugh about it. Yeah, I think, to be honest, it'll pull us into the next story. It's a very Labour heavy night. It's a Labour government section to go through, and I think we'll also have a quick look through the chat once I've gone through this. So just in terms of the final story that we've got, the honeymoon period, YouGov have called the end of the honeymoon period for Starmer. His approval ratings have fallen to the lowest since February of this year. So we're now at the point where just 35% of British people have a favourable view of the Labour Party leader, which is the fewest since June, and also down from 44% after the election. With that said, YouGov have stressed that he is still the most favourably viewed politician, going up against the likes of Nigel Farage. He's more popular. I was going to say he's a lot more popular. He's not a lot more popular than Nigel Farage, but a bit. He's a little bit more popular than Rishi Sunak, and his disapproval rating is a little bit lower. But there's also been a steep decline for the likes of Rachel Reeves and Angela Rayner since the election. So it's an interesting one because at first glance, this is their lowest. This is his lowest approval rating since February. There is definitely a huge element of what we've been talking about already tonight in terms of disappointing news. Essentially, it's not too bad a performance for someone who's spent the last 2 months telling everyone that it's going to be really bad for the next few months. But it's hard at the moment to differentiate between whether this is just a trend, this is something that's going to happen as standard, or if this is one of the more concerning signs of a centrist party maintaining a small modicum of power and potentially leading to the likes of what we've seen in France with Macron. Davey, I feel like I'm just pulling you back in to continue to dislike Keir Starmer.
It's fine.
But why
I'm
not?
Yeah. Well, I think the first of all, the point that you just made about France is really interesting because a lot of people are looking at this latest betrayal with Macron choosing, what's his name, as the new president, Michel Barnier. But people are forgetting about the more insidious side of it. When you run as a centrist and the right starts to gain popularity, what tends to happen is that people start to move that way and you panic and throw out some right-wing policy. So you alienate the left and you don't fully please the right because they can get the full fat version. And that's exactly what we're going to end up seeing, I worry. You know, Nigel Farage is going to continue to gain popularity because his whole shtick is sitting there going, I do it better anyway, buy this NFT, you know? But I think the other thing that we really need to think about is the provenance of why all this is happening. A bunch of people were these like uncritical, embarrassing people that sat on the internet and went, Labour, like we were saying before, Labour are going to be great when they're in power. They're going to be super left wing. They've just got to pretend for now to attract those other people. And the reality of that is, if you sit there and go, don't please me, I'll vote for you no matter what, people are going to turn around and go, okay, I won't please you then. And then they'll go after the people that are on the stream, you know? And there's the complication of, did they need to do that in order to win? Perhaps they did in this weird country where people are obsessed with the Daily Mail and idiotic politics. But do they have to go far enough that, you know, there are people that are sat there going, did we change governments or is this just the same people with like different faces? I just feel like we live in Madland.
Yeah, I think it's, the thing is, I think there's a good question. There's a good point in the chat from Phil, whose last name I'm not going to say. But whilst we're here, thank you so much, Phil, for the gifted subs. Labour supporters had one goal: get the Tories out. Then they didn't ask any other questions beyond that. So I don't know if it's necessarily that he ever had an approval rating that was that high. He just was less disliked. Or not even, I mean, I don't even know if he was less disliked at this stage. Obviously there was a stage where people were feeling relatively comfortable that he might be able to do the right thing. I think what's a really unusual position that the Labour Party are in at the moment is they're getting heat from both sides. because they haven't committed. They haven't, and they're not defending their reasoning behind anything. They're just saying stuff because they think it will match the approval of one side or the other. It actually kind of reminds me of, like, you know, a kid in school that would bully other kids to try and get in with the right crowd. They'd be like, well, I'm mean to you, I'm going to bully you because then I won't be bullied as much. But they never really were popular. It's a little bit sad, but I don't really feel that sad for them.
No, the phrase has always been elections are like current parties to lose, and the Tories would, like, they would. I mean, how long did I sit on the internet saying how bad the Tories were? You know, like, I can't reiterate that. Yes, we do in fact know that the Tories were garbage, but the problem is we've replaced them with people who are saying similar things. Okay, maybe it's not as mean, maybe no Rwanda, because, you know, like, they might be offering crap politics, but they're not insane. But that's the improvement, you know, and this is, people in the UK seem to be trained to go, well, sure, it's not good politics, but at least they're not the Tories. And it's like, there's there's reform all the way over here. Then there's this current iteration of the Conservatives. Then there's Labour. Then there's this, like, yawning chasm, and then there's good. And it's like, how about we aim for somewhere, you know, to this side of the chasm? Actually, that's the problem we've got.
It's the catering to fascists, but then over time having to, again, tying back into what we were talking about with the policing, as you get further and further to this, it's a cyclical thing that we see in history, but as you get further and further towards this threat of the far right, you start to see more and more democratic rights being taken away, because we have to get rid of the fascists. We can't let the fascists in. We can't let the far right in. Sometimes in history, that's been pitted as we can't let the far left in or the far right in. And the far right have been Nazis. But we obviously both as bad as each other. So we have to keep them both at bay by removing these freedoms. There's an interesting message in the chat talking about the French word for this, which, would you like to try and pronounce it in a French accent?
Démocratie.
I was going to say it the exact same way, so that's perfect.
Obviously. Also, hi, Marty.
Let's see. It is the illusion of democracy, but really it's a dictatorship. The idea of the mask slipping, it's getting more and more obvious. There's also a message from Edward, who has said that basically we need to get our shit together and stop it. That was kind of what I wanted to angle us towards before the end of the live today, because I feel like a lot of these news updates are horrible. There's a lot of really depressing news, and I don't want us to just be ruining people's Fridays by talking through what's actually going on. But there's a very, very real threat of something very serious happening. It's getting tiring telling people again and again that a bad thing is going to happen, and they keep getting worse and worse and worse. What are the things that you think are important for us over the next few years to avoid what we've seen in France?
It's got to be getting back to grassroots stuff. I think, like, if you think about it, really, the rule is, like, start in your own backyard. And if everyone's working on their own backyard, then there won't be a mess anyway. We have to create some really cohesive networks that strengthen our local resources, and then we can kind of broaden them out and kind of come up with something that's a more cohesive movement. But I think the big thing as well is we have to come up with a solid framework of what we're working for, because there's a lot of disparate voices, even across the kind of, like, further left, or whatever you bloody want to call it, you know. We have to come up with a kind of set of tenets that we're working towards, and that it's got to be simple, you know, the emancipation of workers who are suffering, the equality of people across, like, all of the different intersections. And really, it's just got to be, let's be adults and work together. It's not about making the case for our politics being adult, because they're not childish. They've literally been implemented across the world multiple times. People that think it's childish are just reductive and can't think properly. It's about convincing people that we have a right to govern, because other people have tried and failed, and we can't use neoliberalism to fix the problems of neoliberalism. It doesn't work.
Could we arrest them, though?
Absolutely. Let's do it now.
Is it plausible?
I mean, we can.
Yeah.
We can try.
Sorry.
We can try. No.
I was just going to get really frustrated again. I was just going to get really frustrated by it again. But just to say thank you, Cole, for becoming a member as well at the same time. I would love to hear more from yourselves in the chat as well. I think people will know the big things for me, I think, are always media literacy and critical thinking as really important topics for like looking at education and the education system, because as much as people joke about the idea that like uni fees got more expensive and then people just stopped going to uni and that's when everything went to shit, there is a huge gap in access to education at the moment. Teachers are massively overstretched, public sector is overstretched entirely, and it doesn't leave as much room for the important bits of socializing people, I think, in terms of like morality and questioning what you're seeing. The misinformation that we're going to see over the next couple of years, I think, is going to get pretty insane. I don't know if you've had much of this, but I've had quite a lot of it on TikTok of people just posting like outright, like not misinformed, but just like outright misinformation at this stage.
Yeah, absolutely. Like all the time. You know, stuff as obvious as there is no genocide. Well, it's not proven either way, but you know, if something trends towards it, then you can say, I'm worried that's what's happening. Or, you know, I mean, as an LGBT plus person, it's just relentless, you know, like calling me a groomer. Like I think your kids are ugly and boring. I don't even want them near me. You know, like I just want to get on with my life, but I get called a groomer because I'm born a certain way. It's absolutely insane. And then there's the stuff that we deal with in terms of the domestic politics that we talk about, where, you know, like, yes, there's reasons to hate the World Economic Forum, but it's not that they're trying to wokeify your children into being transgender small migrant people. It's that they're I mean, you know, maybe I'm not, never, I'm kidding. Internet, I'm kidding.
Same, also
But
big joke, sorry.
It's absolutely insane that what I find with right-wing people that I often argue with is there's the seed of a point. There's some kind of like, yes, that is something we need to talk about. And then it's just like wrapped in a milfoil of insanity. And I'm like, how the hell am I supposed to get to the nub of that and say this, yeah, all of that? No.
I think that's what I find so frustrating, because I think actually having that cynicism, the cynicism that leads people to crazy conspiracy theories, I think is fair. I'm like, good. You're skeptical of institutions of power. Stick with me. And then they'll just fire off onto the craziest shit and immediately completely lose track. It's almost more annoying to me to see people do that than not start at all, like not even start to question it.
Yeah, because it's like you've done the tiniest bit, and then you've just decided that the easy solution is just this absolute cavalcade of insanity. I remember the last time I posted on Facebook was a thing just saying like, hi, you know, I don't post much here, not anymore. I'm in huge support of the BLM movement that's happening in America and the UK. You know, people of color have suffered disproportionately in a society that's allied against them for a very long time, and it's time that we acknowledge that and we start to deal with it as adults. And my crazy uncle was like, they're trying to teach children to masturbate in schools. And I was like, babe, I'm just not even gonna, like, you know, yeah. He genuinely believes they're trying to teach children to masturbate in schools as part of the like liberal agenda. And I'm like, to what end? Let's just follow that to its logical conclusion. I think you'll find you can't, because there's no freaking logic in it.
To what end, sir?
Right? Honestly.
What would the point be? It's like when we get accused of being leftist grifters.
Yeah, like
to what end?
Yeah, like the people that have all the money are the ones that desperately need to implement socialism because they have none. They're the best people to grift off. They are.
I think my favorite to what end of that conversation from someone was when I had someone say that they thought that I liked immigration. And I was talking about immigration being a good thing because I wanted more immigrants to come to the country and have children and then be able to vote. And then all of those immigrants would vote for left-wing parties and I'd have what I wanted.
These being the same immigrants that were constantly told are going to bring in Sharia law and, you know, like also hate the gays.
And then they're going to be leftist also, leftist homophobic.
I will never get over Liz Truss saying that she was brought down by a coalition of trans activists and Islamists. I'm like, two people that notoriously play well together are fundamentalist Islam people and trans people, just thick as thieves they are.
They're just in cahoots constantly.
Honestly.
It's fantastic, Cole. Mind control superpower needed first. I know, and we will work on that. That's another solid option for us. I'm aware that we are up to the hour. I feel like we're probably just going to go offline and have the same, continue our complaints, but not with a live stream.
Absolutely.
But thank you so much for joining us for tonight. I appreciate it. I hope it's nice to end on a little bit of positive action, I think, in terms of things that we can do. Just to let everybody know, if you haven't watched before, you haven't joined before, we are online on Sunday as well for the debrief session, which is a little bit more relaxed to talk about the rest of the week. You can find both myself and Davie over on TikTok at the handles on the screen. Daviemoo and Sneakcret, those are not our full names. Those are our TikTok names. So you can find us over there. If you enjoyed the show, thank you so much, Phil, for 10 Turn Left memberships. If you enjoyed the show, please do go ahead and support Turn Left. Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. Give us some love, give us some support. We really appreciate it. As I said at the beginning of the hour, do let us know anything that you want to talk about. You can either tag us on Twitter or drop something in the comments here. Any stories that you want to cover that you don't think are being done justice by the mainstream media. Remember, there is a lot of news happening and it's happening all the time. If you want us to cover it, we would love to be able to cover more of this. You can help us grow this platform by supporting us on Patreon for £3 or £5 a month. Or any one-off donation can be made over at patreon.com/turnleftmedia. Thank you all so much for joining. It has been lovely to hear from you today. Keep yourselves safe and we will see you soon.
Patreon.com/turnleftmedia. Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn Left.